you tell us, when did the Arctic and Antarctic freeze over, and what is really making them melt?
Well, the idea that the ice caps are melting is an evolutionary concept that goes along with the supposed global warming, but as I have pointed out, the Earth has been in the process of cooling for better than 20 years now. We have been in a severe solar minimum this last cycle, though there has been a little more sunspot activity in the last month. Today there was 0 sunspots. Now, in the question about the polar ice caps, they formed after the flood of Noah due to the events that were experienced at the beginning of the flood. So at the beginning of the flood, we had a mile-thick layer of water coming up from below. That water was 900 degrees Fahrenheit, mixing with the warm seas that already existed. Now, the water, when it comes up at 900 degrees, because of expansion cooling, would have cooled fairly quickly, but nonetheless, we're adding a lot of hot water to already warm water. That water is going to then evaporate quickly, because the warmer the water, the faster the evaporation.
Correct.
At the same time, once the earth cracks open, as we produced a DVD with Revelation called The Waters Cleaved, starts at Caesarea Philippi, goes down the Jordan River, down the Red Sea, into the Indian Ocean, and around the world. The volcanic activity that starts at the time of the flood produces thousands of volcanoes, many of them underwater, but many above. And the ash from the volcanoes will circle the earth, shading the earth, causing the sunlight heat to be reflected back into space, cooling the atmosphere quickly. And so we have the perfect conditions to build polar ice caps. Now, the book of Job is the first book in the Bible to mention ice and snow, and is written roughly 350 years after the flood. And there are several references to ice and snow in Job, most of them in chapters 37 and 38. But the Ice Age lasted for about 700 years, peaked to approximately 500 years after the flood, waned for about 200. That's our best numbers that we can give you. But the polar ice caps did not exist before the flood. They are created again after the flood because of the events that initiated the flood. We have the perfect conditions. And it was not instantaneous. It's a slow process of building for about 500 and waning for about 2. The polar ice caps covered much lower. I was just going to say the polar ice caps covered a much larger area than today, but after the ice age shrank back to approximately where they are today.
Yeah.
And the evolutionary story of the polar ice caps melting, there is certainly evidence that there's melting, but there's also evidence that there's accumulation at the same time. So you will hear both sides of that story.
Yeah. Interesting you should mention Job there, because in chapter 37, verses 9, it starts off, it does mention, just as you say, I've never noticed that before, Grady, thank you. It says, out of the south comes the storm, and out of the north the cold. From the breath of God, ice is made, and the expanse of the waters is frozen. Okay. And also with moisture, he loads the thick cloud. He disperses the cloud with his lightning, etc.
Well, verse 22 in Job 38.
Yeah.
The storehouses of the snow, the storehouses of the hail, talking about cold temperatures and ice.
Yeah, that's it. You've entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress? Well, thank you again.